He emptied our joint account the morning I was in the hospital getting stitches on my hand, the hand he slammed in the car door the night before. While I was sitting in that sterile ER room filling out forms, he was at our bank, withdrawing $94,000 in cashier's checks. I found out 3 hours later. He didn't even wait until I was home. Before I tell you exactly how I made sure he never touched another dollar that wasn't his, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing someone did to you that finally made you stop making excuses for them? I read every single one. I didn't cry in the hospital. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I cried once, in the shower that night, with the water so hot it turned my skin red because I needed to feel something other than stupid. One time, then I turned off the water, wrapped a towel around myself, and sat on the bathroom floor until the feeling passed. My name is Diana. I am 31 years old. I am a forensic accountant, which means my entire career is built around one skill: finding the money people try to hide. I have spent the last 6 years walking into companies after embezzlement, after fraud, after executives decided the rules applied to everyone except them. I reconstruct what happened. I follow the trail. I find the number that doesn't belong. I am very good at my job. What I was not good at, apparently, was seeing that I had married the exact type of person I spent my professional life hunting. My husband. I will call him my husband because we were still legally married, though I will not use his name here, was a commercial real estate broker. Charming in the way that men who need things from people learn to be charming. He had a good handshake and a better smile, and he remembered everyone's birthday. When we met, I thought that attentiveness was love. I understand now it was inventory management. He was tracking what people valued so he would know what to leverage later. We had been married 4 years. No children, thank God. A house in our joint names. 2 cars, a brokerage account, and a savings account I had funded almost entirely by myself because my income was consistent and his was, as he described it, cyclical. Real estate moves in waves, he always said. I accepted that. I was patient. I believed that what was mine was ours, and what was ours was equal. I want you to understand something before I continue. I was not naive in the way people imagine when they picture a woman who doesn't see what's happening in her own home. I audited Fortune 500 companies. I had caught a VP of finance stealing from a children's hospital. I was not someone who missed things. But there is a particular blindness that comes from loving someone. It is not stupidity. It is a choice you make every morning to extend trust to the person sleeping next to you. Because the alternative is that everything you built together is a crime scene, and you are not ready to process that. Not yet. The night he slammed my hand in the car door, we had been arguing. We were leaving a dinner with colleagues of mine, and he had made a comment at the table. A small, undermining comment about my work, the kind he had been making for months. And I had finally said something back. Not loudly, not dramatically. I had simply said, in front of 4 people, that he needed to stop doing that. In the car, he was furious. I had embarrassed him. I had made him look small. I was reaching for the door handle when he swung it shut. I don't know if it was intentional. I have asked myself that question many times, and I still don't have an answer I trust. What I know is that 2 of my fingers were badly bruised and 1 required stitches where the skin split against the doorframe. He drove me to the ER. He sat in the waiting room. He told the intake nurse I had caught my hand in the door. He brought me a vending machine coffee while I waited. And when the doctor asked me, quietly, away from him, whether I was safe at home, I said yes, because I still believed that what had happened was an accident. That was a Tuesday night. By Friday afternoon, I had a very different understanding of my life. I came home from the hospital Thursday morning hand bandaged, on 2 days of leave from work. He was solicitous. He made breakfast. He apologized, not for the door, not specifically, but in the general soft way he had, saying he hated seeing me hurt, saying he would do better. I let him talk. I was tired. I took the pain medication, and I slept most of Thursday away. Friday morning, I woke up, and he was gone. Business trip, he had mentioned. Seattle, a property deal. I made coffee and opened my laptop out of habit. I check our shared finances every Friday, a practice he knew about and found tedious and occasionally mocked, calling me the household CFO in a tone that was never entirely a compliment. The savings account balance was $847. I sat with that number for a full 30 seconds before my brain accepted what I was seeing. The account should have held just over $94,000. It was the account I had been building for 3 years. My contribution each month was systematic, disciplined, automatic. His contributions were sporadic, smaller, but present. We had talked about using it for a down payment on a larger property. It was the most tangible evidence that we were building something together. $847. I clicked into the transaction history. Thursday morning, 9:14 a.m. While I was still in the hospital, while the anesthetic from the stitches was still wearing off, there had been a cash withdrawal. Not a transfer. Not an electronic payment. A teller-assisted cash withdrawal in the form of 2 cashier's checks. The memo line read, "Personal investment." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. I want to tell you what happens in the body of a forensic accountant when she looks at a transaction that doesn't belong. Most people feel shock first. I skipped shock entirely. What I felt was recognition. I had seen this pattern before, not in my marriage, but in my work. The cash out before the confrontation. The conversion to instruments that are harder to trace. The timing chosen for a moment of maximum vulnerability. This was not an accident. This was a procedure. He had planned this. He had planned this before the dinner, possibly before the argument, possibly while I was at work on a Tuesday thinking about other people's money. And when the car door closed on my hand, when I ended up in the hospital instead of at home, he had seen an opportunity to move up his timeline. I opened a new spreadsheet. Old habit. When the world goes sideways, I build a grid. I started with what I knew. Joint savings, gone. I checked our brokerage account next. The brokerage account required both our signatures for withdrawals over $10,000, a provision I had insisted on when we opened it. The balance was intact. He knew he couldn't touch it without me. That was why he had gone for the savings account instead. I kept pulling threads. 3 months ago, I had noticed a charge on our joint credit card, $3,200, to a company called Vantage Consulting Partners. I had asked him about it, and he said it was a professional development course for his broker's license renewal. I accepted that. I did not look it up. I looked it up now. Vantage Consulting Partners did not appear to have a website. The registered business address was a UPS store mailbox in Scottsdale, Arizona. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize. I searched that name. He appeared as a registered agent for 11 other LLCs, all formed in the last 2 years, none of them with any apparent business activity. I opened another tab. 6 weeks ago, our joint credit card had a balance transfer, $8,500 moved to pay off what he described as a business card I hadn't known existed. I had been annoyed, but not alarmed. He was independent. He had business expenses. I trusted him. I searched for the business card account. It took me 20 minutes to find the statement forwarded to an email address I had never seen. A variation of his name with a number at the end. The kind of email you make when you're trying to separate your financial life from someone who might be watching. I was watching now. By noon, I had a document that was 11 pages long. I had found 3 accounts I had not known existed. I had found a pattern of small transfers, always under $10,000, always spaced at least 3 weeks apart, designed to stay below the threshold that triggers automatic bank reporting. I had found 2 LLCs registered in his name that I had never heard him mention, and I had found, buried in a Google Drive folder he had shared with me years ago for household documents, a file labeled Property Research that was actually a draft settlement proposal, a divorce settlement proposal. Dated 6 weeks ago, it proposed that I receive the house, which had a mortgage, and he receive the investment accounts and liquid assets, citing his contributions to the household during periods of income variability. It was written in legal language. He had already talked to a lawyer. He had been planning this for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer, while making breakfast and apologizing in that soft, general way of his and sitting in hospital waiting rooms with vending machine coffee. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen, ran cold water over my bandaged hand, and stood there for a while listening to the water run. Here is the thing about discovering that someone you love has been systematically robbing you. There is a grief that comes with it that has nothing to do with the money I could fight for. What I was grieving was the version of my life I had believed in. Every ordinary Tuesday, every shared meal, every moment I had taken as evidence that I was loved. I was now running backward through all of it, recalibrating, and it was exhausting in a way that made the bruised hand feel like nothing. I gave myself until 3 o'clock to feel it. At 3 o'clock, I called my colleague Priya. Priya and I had worked together for 4 years. She was a CPA with a secondary specialty in matrimonial forensics, the financial side of divorces, specifically the kind where one party is hiding assets. She was sharp and meticulous, and she had once described her job as helping people prove what they already know. I had always found that phrase interesting. Now I understood it from the inside. She answered on the second ring. Diana. Her voice was professional, then immediately careful when she heard something in my silence. What happened? I need a consult, I said. Personal matter. And I need a contact at the state AG's office. Financial crimes. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. How bad? Cashier's checks drawn on joint funds during a medical absence. Shell company pattern. Pre-planned asset dissipation. Time to a divorce he hasn't filed yet. And I think there's a wire fraud angle if the LLCs were used to move money across state lines. She exhaled slowly. Okay, send me everything. I'll make a call tonight. There is a particular kind of trust between women who work in financial investigation. We have both spent our careers in rooms where men assumed we were there to take notes. We do not waste each other's time. I sent her the 11-page document, the transaction records, the LLC registrations, the draft settlement file, and the email account I had found. Then I made one more call, my own attorney. I had never needed a divorce lawyer before. I called the firm that handled my professional liability insurance. They referred me immediately to a partner who specialized in complex asset cases. I laid out the situation in 12 minutes. She was quiet through most of it, occasionally typing. At the end, she said, "Do not move out of the house. Do not touch the joint accounts. Do not confront him. And get me everything your colleague is compiling. I want to freeze those cashier's check proceeds before he can deposit them anywhere they can't be reached." Can you do that? I asked. If he hasn't deposited them yet and we can show they were drawn from a joint account without consent, yes, it becomes a wrongful conversion issue on top of the divorce asset question. She paused. You said you work in forensic accounting? Yes. Then you already understand what we have here. This wasn't impulsive. This was constructed. Which means there is a paper trail and paper trails can be followed. She was right. I knew that better than almost anyone. I spent the rest of Friday building the case. Not out of anger, or not only out of anger, out of precision. This was what I did. I found the leaks. I followed the money. The fact that it was my money made me faster, not slower. I knew the accounts. I knew the timeline. I knew his patterns in a way no outside investigator could, because I had lived inside his financial life for 4 years. I knew which credit card he reached for first. I knew when he made transfers, always Friday afternoons, always when I was likely to be in a late meeting. I knew the name of his accountant, his broker, his banker. I had been a thorough and trusting partner, which meant I had accidentally assembled the most comprehensive profile of his financial behavior that anyone could possibly have. He had forgotten that. He thought he had married someone who would be too hurt to look closely. He thought grief and shock would do what they always do, slow people down, make them reactive, keep them focused on the emotional wound instead of the forensic one. He had watched me work for years and somehow failed to understand that the work was not something I turned off. Saturday morning, he texted from Seattle. Hope you're feeling better. Home Monday. Miss you. I read the message twice. Then I forwarded it to my attorney with a timestamp. Sunday, Priya called. She had spoken to a contact at the Financial Crimes Unit, not the state AG's office directly, but a referral to a federal examiner who handled interstate wire fraud cases, because 2 of the LLCs had been used to move funds between Arizona and Nevada. She had also confirmed that one of the cashier's checks had been deposited into a bank account registered to Vantage Consulting Partners, the Scottsdale mailbox company, on Friday afternoon. He had moved fast. He had also, in moving fast, created a documented paper trail of a fraudulent transfer. The timing alone, drawn from a joint account while I was incapacitated, deposited into a shell company he controlled, was enough to initiate an inquiry. She also told me something I had not found. 2 years before we married, he had done something similar to a previous partner. No criminal charges had been filed. She had taken a settlement, signed a non-disclosure, moved away. But the financial examiner's office had a note on file. A note that now, with my case beside it, created a pattern. I sat with that for a long time. He had done this before. He had chosen someone with money, with financial literacy ironically working against her because she trusted her own judgment about people the way she trusted her judgment about numbers. He had learned what it took for a woman to not look too closely. He had done it once, and it had worked, and so he had done it again. The grief I had given myself until 3 o'clock to feel. I felt it again, briefly, standing in the kitchen where I had made coffee that morning, believing I was going home to a difficult conversation, and instead walking into evidence of a second crime against a second woman who had trusted him. Then I went back to my laptop. Monday morning, he came home tan and relaxed, rolling his suitcase through the front door, dropping his keys on the table where he always dropped his keys. He asked how my hand was. He said Seattle had gone well, a lot of promising leads. He opened the refrigerator and said we were out of sparkling water and asked if I wanted him to run to the store. I said no. I said I was actually glad he was home because I needed him to come with me to meet with a financial advisor. I said I had been thinking while he was away that we needed to restructure some things, get more organized. I said I had been worried about our long-term planning. He agreed immediately. Of course, that was smart. He always liked when I took charge of the financial picture. I had chosen a conference room at my attorney's firm. I had told him it was a shared office space I sometimes used for client meetings. He dressed well for it. He always dressed well when money might be on the table. The financial advisor was real. She was also my attorney's colleague, and the two women in that room with me were both fully briefed. Across from them sat a man from the State Financial Crimes Investigative Unit who had agreed to observe as a professional courtesy and who had in his jacket pocket documentation authorizing a formal inquiry into the activities of Vantage Consulting Partners and its affiliated entities. My husband sat down, adjusted his cuffs, and smiled at the room the way he always smiled at rooms where he expected something to go in his favor. My attorney slid a document across the table. She told him it was a full accounting disclosure request, standard in contested asset proceedings. She told him we would need him to sign, acknowledging that all assets listed were complete and accurate, under penalty of law. He looked at me. I looked back at him. He picked up the pen. He was still performing confidence. I watched him decide in real time that the best play was to seem cooperative, to sign, and then manage whatever came next. He had done this before. He knew how to absorb an opening move. He signed. My attorney turned the document over. She said, I also need to inform you that this proceeding is being observed by an investigator from the State Financial Crimes Unit in connection with an ongoing inquiry into Vantage Consulting Partners, its registered agent, and 2 associated LLCs. She said his name. She read the relevant statutes: fraudulent conveyance, wrongful conversion of jointly held assets, wire fraud, given the interstate transfers, conspiracy to defraud a spouse to coordinated asset concealment. He stopped smiling. The investigator introduced himself. He was calm and procedural, the way people in that line of work learn to be. He explained that the cashier's checks had been traced. He explained that the LLC structure had been reviewed. He explained that the previous matter, the one from 2 years before our marriage, was being reopened in light of a documented pattern. My husband looked at me the way my father looked at me once, when I was 12 and he realized I had found the birthday present he had hidden. Except this time, the look was not sheepish. It was something colder, like he was calculating how this had happened, running back through the sequence, trying to find where he had miscalculated. You did this, he said. I smoothed the folder in front of me. I said, you withdrew $94,000 from our joint account while I was getting stitches in my hand. You deposited it into a shell company you registered under a mailbox address. You had a draft divorce settlement prepared 6 weeks ago that assigned you all liquid assets. You have done a version of this before. I looked at him steadily. You made one mistake, I said. You forgot what I do for a living. He started to speak. My attorney raised a hand and said that anything he wished to say should be directed to his own legal counsel, whom he was welcome to call immediately, and that in the meantime the inquiry was proceeding regardless. He sat there for a moment in his good suit in the room he had walked into expecting to manage me, and I watched the version of himself he had built. The charming one, the careful one, the one with the good handshake and the remembered birthdays. I watched it come apart in real time. What was left underneath was just a man who had run a very old con and had finally run it on the wrong person. He did not make a scene. He was too controlled for that. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. His attorney called mine before end of business. The cashier's check proceeds were frozen pending court order. The LLC accounts were flagged. The previous case was reopened. And the woman who had signed that NDA, I don't know her name, I probably never will, would at least know that she had not been alone in what had happened to her. The divorce took 8 months. I will not walk you through all of it because most of it was paperwork and waiting. And the paperwork was, genuinely, the part I was best at. I kept the house. I didn't want the house. It had become a building I associated with a particular quality of silence, but I kept it long enough to sell it and take my equity out clean. The brokerage account was split equitably. The court awarded me a judgment for the wrongfully converted funds plus interest. His broker's license is currently under review. The federal wire fraud inquiry is still open as of the last I was informed. These things move slowly. I have made peace with that. The law is not built for speed, and I no longer need it to be. I needed it to work. It worked. I moved into a smaller apartment on the north side of the city. Bright windows, good coffee shop on the corner, a 15-minute commute to my office. I kept the plants. I bought new sheets. I went back to work the Monday after the conference room meeting, sat down at my desk, and opened a new case file for a client whose CFO had been quietly rerouting expense reimbursements for 3 years. I found the discrepancy by lunch. My colleague Priya asked me, a few weeks after everything settled, whether I felt like I had gotten justice. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I told her that justice was not quite the right word for what I felt. What I felt was more like clarity, like I had been living in a house with a slow leak in the foundation, something quietly wrong beneath the structure, and I had finally found it and named it and addressed it the way it needed to be addressed. The house was not saved, but I was no longer standing in it, wondering why the floors felt uneven. I told her something else too. I told her that the hardest part had not been building the case. The hardest part had been the moment in the ER on Thursday morning when the doctor asked me quietly if I was safe at home, and I said yes, because I still believed I was. That gap between what I knew professionally and what I could accept personally. That gap is where he had lived for 4 years, and closing it had nothing to do with spreadsheets or LLCs or cashier's checks. It had to do with deciding that what I knew mattered more than what I wanted to be true. If you have ever looked at the numbers in your own life and been afraid of what they were telling you, drop the word clear in the comments and share this if you believe that the truth, however late, is always worth finding. I used to think that the worst betrayals announced themselves, that you would feel them coming the way you feel a storm, a drop in pressure, a shift in the air, something in your body that says, pay attention. What I know now is that the most deliberate betrayals are specifically designed to feel like nothing. They are built in the ordinary spaces of a life, in a shared account, in a signature on a form, in a man sitting in a hospital waiting room holding a vending machine coffee while the woman he married gets stitches in her hand. What happened to Diana was not an accident of character. It was a construction. Every step, the shell companies, the draft settlement, the timing against her medical absence, required planning, patience, and a complete willingness to treat another person as a problem to be solved, rather than a human being to be considered. That is not weakness dressed up as cruelty. That is a choice, made repeatedly, over a long period of time. And choices of that kind carry weight that eventually has to be set down somewhere. The thing about building a life on deception is that it requires the other person to stay still. It requires them to keep not looking, keep not asking, keep extending the benefit of the doubt past the point where the doubt has earned it. The moment Diana really looked, with the same precision she brought to every case file on her desk, the entire structure became visible, not because she was exceptional, because she was finally willing to see. There is something worth sitting with in that. Intelligence alone does not protect us. Diana was, by any measure, one of the sharpest financial minds in a room on any given day. And she had still not seen it, not because she lacked the skill, but because she had made the human choice to trust. The lesson is not to stop trusting. The lesson is to understand that trust is something you extend to the present, not a blank check written to the future. When the present starts giving you information, you owe it to yourself to read it. The resilience it takes to do what she did, to build a case in the same week she was grieving the marriage she thought she had, that does not come from being hard. It comes from being honest. She allowed herself exactly the time she needed to feel the loss. And then she stood up and did the work. That is not coldness. That is the kind of integrity that most people talk about and very few people actually practice when it costs them something. What her husband did not understand, what people who operate the way he did consistently fail to understand, is that actions have mass. They accumulate. You cannot move $94,000 out of a joint account while your wife is in an emergency room and have that be a neutral event in the universe. You cannot build shell companies and draft secret settlements and treat a person's financial future as a resource to strip and walk away clean. The evidence existed because the actions existed. The paper trail was real because the theft was real. Diana did not manufacture consequences. She simply refused to let the consequences be buried. That is what staying free actually looks like. Not escape, not revenge, just the decision to stop paying the cost of someone else's choices.